Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us on another episode of Decrypting IT. I'm your host, Ashley Wallace, Client Success Lead here at Catalyst Network Group. Today, we're diving into a critical topic, perimeter security, and why it's more important than ever for organizations right now to take back control of the edge. When we talk about perimeter defense today, we'll be talking about more than just firewalls. It's all about the security layers that protect the boundary between a business and the outside world. Still, the firewall remains the foundation, and it's evolved beyond just blocking traffic. Firewalls are now powerful security platforms that inspect, decrypt, and prevent threats and enforce policies in real time. So I'm super excited to have Steve McNutt on with me today. He's got a wealth of experience and credentials in the cybersecurity space. He holds a master's of science in cybersecurity and information, along with over 20 industry certifications, and just excels at simplifying complex concepts. So again, really excited to have him on. Steve has also done some publications, which include the AWS Advanced Networking Certification Guide and Detection and Response with XDR training, video training course. So that's pretty awesome. And he's been a distinguished speaker in worldwide and done multiple events. He lives in North Carolina, in Western North Carolina, with his wife Caroline and their two dogs, and loves mountain biking and snowboarding. So again, Steve, thanks for joining us. We're again really excited to have you on. So
Thanks for having me.
I wanted you to just kind of start off, if you don't mind, share a little bit with us about your role at Cisco and how you're working with firewalls and helping shape the perimeter security strategy there at Cisco.
Sure. So I'm what's called a solutions engineer, and I cover the entire portfolio of everything that Cisco sells with respect to security, but also really beyond that. Because as a solutions engineer, my job isn't to sell products. My job is to understand a customer's environment, how everything's put together, where the critical applications and data live, and to really get involved and help them improve their security posture. And so a lot of times that means getting involved with architecture and things like that. So I'll typically participate in a dialogue, with the senior architects at the client, and sometimes with the engineers, and sometimes we'll create what are called a proof of value labs, where I'll actually create a scale model of a customer's infrastructure and show what we can do to improve matters. So it's a lot of fun. I get to look at big picture, but then if I want to drill down, I sometimes have opportunities.
Nice. So you're definitely getting in there and working in real environments on a regular basis, that kind of thing, and
Absolutely.
working with the architects. That's so cool. Perfect. Well, we've got the right person on the phone to talk or online with us to talk today. So I'm excited about that. I want to just kind of set the stage here and ask you, why is a strong perimeter so critical in today's environment and landscape? And as threats evolve and more workloads are moving to the cloud, how is that making it that much more critical?
Okay, so you still have organizations still have boundaries, right? We don't have the physical boundaries that we had 20 years ago, where you've got a campus with guards, gates, and guns, for example. Now, as you pointed out, most organizations are a hybrid, which means they're going to have some on-prem, some racks of compute in a data center, and then they're going to have some things in a public cloud service provider. But there's still, you need to protect those applications and data wherever they happen to be. And so that really defines the perimeter, is how you gain access to those protected resources. Really, in some ways, it hasn't changed. There's still a perimeter. An organization still has a perimeter. It just has taken a different shape, and it's caused an evolution in how security products are managed and maybe in some senses conceptualized. But the really important thing to appreciate is prevention is important, right? You want to put those in there to keep the bad guys out in the first place. But
Right.
here's the question that a lot of people don't want to think about. And because of that, they don't spend enough time thinking about it. And that is, what do you do when you've been breached? How do you kick the attackers out? If you don't have a strong perimeter, how are you just going to keep them from continuing to move around inside of your organization? You've got to be able to kick them out and keep them out once you've found them. And so this is where it's probably, and this is really important. It's just that after you have been breached, getting them out and keeping them out. And that may be more important than the preventative aspect of it, because if you cannot reestablish control of your environment, you may not survive as an organization.
Right. So when you see that, what are the first steps that you would take, you know, in that situation?
So what you first saw, right? I mean, in a situation like that, so there's going to be the attackers typically they follow playbook, right? And this is all, if you're interested in learning more about that, there's a really good site to look up. Is MITRE, so MITRE. So MITRE is an organization that creates frameworks to help you understand security. And a really important one is called MITRE ATT&CK. And MITRE ATT&CK lays out the taxonomy of all the ways attackers can try to take control of your environment and use that to profit, right? And so generally speaking, they're going to do create what's called an initial access, or they're going to gain an initial foothold in the environment. And from that point, they're going to try to spread laterally, and they're going to try to take control of more nodes. And from each of these nodes, they're going to establish what's called a command and control callback, where they're going to they have to get back out of the environment, back to the attacker's going to have some kind of control system that they're using to interact with those resources that are inside of your organization. So this is where your perimeter security is not only an opportunity for you to detect what's happening, to be able to see, to be able to observe that, but obviously to also be able to shut it down.
And is one of the pieces that's critical in doing so, like pinpointing obviously where it begins and how they got into the network to begin with, or
Yep.
the environment. Okay.
So, yep. And then you need to figure out how they've spread. Again, being able to detect that, being able to see how are they calling back out from your environment, and being able to determine that is like one of the crucial early steps once you realize you've been breached.
Got it. And so if we transform back to understanding, now we've got a basic understanding on, where we go there. How do we prevent that? Obviously, when we're talking about the perimeter, so firewall configurations on such, but give us some good examples on different ways that we can configure the firewalls, or just your best practices on setting up a strong perimeter.
Okay. So obviously, I think at some point in this discussion, I'm assuming MFA was going to come up. So let's talk about that now.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
MFA is like what multi-factor authentication is like one of your strongest controls.
Yep.
Because firewalls have gotten pretty good and network-based attacks have become, at least from the exterior, and that's an interesting point. Generally speaking, on organizational boundaries, when you're looking at like the exterior, the public-facing side, that boundary between the public-facing and private-facing side of a network, those boundaries, we've had a lot of experience in building that up, right, and hardening that. So there's less and less opportunity, but there's still opportunities. I know we'll get to that later, but because there's less opportunity there to get that initial penetration, attackers are really look for one of their easiest ways in now is just identity. Like I break in when you can log in, right? That's like the catchphrase. You can assume that if you've been targeted, that the attacker has gone through some reconnaissance and they've probably made some effort to acquire credentials for people that work in your organization. They're going to have those. And so at that point, the only thing stopping them from using those credentials is going to be multi-factor authentication. So that's like really important. The second thing but going back to the actual devices themselves, these are still, attackers are always looking for vulnerabilities in firewalls. I'm not going to mention any vendors by name because that would be weird because some of them are competitors. If you just go and look in the news, you'll see periodically like large firewall vendors, these software vulnerabilities come out because a lot of energy is put into how do we attack this firewall? How can we take advantage of this firewall? How can we leverage some software flaw that allows us to do something we don't want to do? And again, I don't want to get too into details, but those do come out, right? These vulnerabilities come out. And when those vulnerabilities come out, you need to be aware of them, and you need to be able to appreciate like which of these vulnerabilities is important. And if it is important, you have to go and fix that. So like vulnerabilities, like when you look at classifying vulnerabilities, and I apologize if I'm like jumping ahead, but if you look at classifying vulnerabilities, one of the things that I'm always looking at, like when I'm scanning through like a CVSS report on a software vulnerability, first thing I want to know is, do you have to be authenticated? Does this require authentication, or is this unauthenticated? Authenticated, that's bad, obviously, because you don't need credentials. Number two, does this attack have to be local or can it be done remote, right? So is it unauthenticated and remote? That's bad. That means that you don't have to authenticate. You can execute it from anywhere. Then what kind of attack is it? Is it just a simple denial of service, like causing your firewall to reboot to prevent people from accessing the service, or even all the way up to the worst possibility, which is you leverage this vulnerability to execute code on that firewall, like for example, creating accounts for themselves or things like that. So skimming through a report and you see unauthenticated remote code execution, that's like, stop what you're doing, patch your firewall now.
Yep. We're in bad shape. This is like a fire drill. Everyone's all hands on deck kind of situation.
Absolutely. And even worse, if it's like a 0-day, like there's no patch for it yet. Or if you have organizational change control processes where you can't just go in and immediately apply a patch. Being able to find out about these and action on them quickly is obviously very, very
Right. Great. Actually, I want to kind of circle back to MFA a little bit and just kind of bring in our cybersecurity report. So we just conducted, Catalyst did, we had conducted a annual cybersecurity report. We just published it. I think you saw that just briefly, but we saw that 60% of clients had misconfigured or missing DMZs, and then 58% of them lacked MFA or used shared admin accounts. So can you talk about? We did just briefly touch on why this is such a huge issue, right? Does that surprise you at all to see that high of a percentage of
okay.
folks
So
that are?
on the first one, I am surprised. So let's talk about DMZs. So I'm going to use a different term. So you call it what you call a DMZ. I refer to as macro segmentation. So this is coarse grained segmentation, right? We're going to put these assets in this leg of the firewall, and then we're going to have these assets in this other leg of the firewall. So because a DMZ implies they're only going to have like one area, and that's sort of an older design concept. What I generally do when I'm designing for a customer is I'm trying to find out what are your critical resources and what are the traffic flows and how can we segment those out. So that way, again, we're talking about like if an attacker were to get into like one of these servers over here, we want to minimize their opportunity to get these other servers over here. So if you're putting them on different DMZs or zones within that firewall, that gives you not only the ability to detect that traffic, but also the ability to stop them from spreading around in environments. It's really truly incredible to me that in 2025 we're not doing smart design when we're designing our networks and we're leveraging the power of these firewalls to perform segmentation. That's what they're good at. That's what they're there for. You should do that. You shouldn't just have an outside and an inside. Take those critical resources and separate them out like a really easy low-hanging fruit management interfaces. You should never, for example, if let's say you're running VMware, you should never be able to log into vCenter just like straight over VPN connection. That's a huge no-no. Or being able to access, say, the management interfaces of your servers, right? Like your remote control ports and things like that. That should always be segmented. So this is a perfect example of where you would use your firewall and create DMZs or security zones.
Yeah.
So I am surprised that's not being leveraged more. I talk about it with my customers almost every single engagement. That's one of the things we talk about. The MFA, that's surprising because I think everybody understands now that there's a huge black market for stolen credentials. Your junior admins, if they're using Google, if you're using Google Chrome, if you're an administrator in an organization, you're using Google Chrome to store your passwords, you need to just stop right now, delete all of that, and never do it again. Because
Really?
it's very easy.
Hey,
Yes,
this
never
is
do that.
surprising to me. I did not know that.
Do not
Okay,
do
let's
that.
talk about that for a second. That's interesting.
Don't use web browser password managers. That's a big no-no. That's how. So okay, since I work for Cisco, I can talk about this. We've been open about this. So if
Okay.
anybody listening remembers, like maybe I think it was almost 2 years ago now, Cisco did get breached, and unfortunately, they didn't get to any of our critical assets because we were just talking about things like layering and defense in depth and macro segmentation and being able
Yep.
to constrain an attacker from just running wild. Obviously, we do those things, but how they gained initial access was we had some people that were storing their credentials in a Chrome password manager, and that was how the attacker got the credentials initially. That was their initial point of being able to get into the organization. It was a laptop computer, and someone was storing their passwords in Google Chrome. And obviously, think about this: password reuse is very common. So if you're storing your password in Google Chrome and you're reusing that password internally, right? So
Yep.
don't do it.
Okay.
And so that's
I may
why
or may not at a time have been guilty of this. We're
I
gonna
mean,
be
you're probably
really. I
okay
did
with
not know
like
that.
an account, like some account you're using for like ordering something online that you don't have a credit card stored with them or anything. But yeah,
Right.
don't. I wouldn't. Yeah, definitely don't do that. So MFA that's like identity is part of the perimeter now, right? That's another sort of catchphrase is identity is the new perimeter. And MFA is one of your strongest controls, and it is shocking to me that it's because every customer I work with, I haven't come across a customer that doesn't use MFA in a little while. So that's surprising to me. But that MFA, if you do have some like an administrator storing their credentials in Chrome, that MFA is the difference between you getting breached or not getting breached in that situation.
Yep. Got it. Okay, so I know that we have teams that help organizations, our clients, do MFA and help do all that. How do you go about you know taking on misconfigured or taking on segmentation, as you said, of the firewalls? or
Okay,
creating
so
those DMZs? How do you even begin down that path? If let's say you're somebody, since we've got such a large amount that we've seen that do not have this,
yeah.
what are the first steps that they can take, and how do they solve for these things?
Well, like anything, you have to prioritize. So part of that is just really understanding your risks and then
Yeah.
prioritizing those risks, and then assigning a dollar value, and then just trying to make the right set of decisions for your circumstances. I mean, if you're lucky and you can afford really big, powerful firewalls, then you have a lot of latitude in what you're able to do. But if you're a smaller organization that can't afford just to go out and drop $500,000 on a bunch of firewalls, and you have to make the most out of what you've got, then you really need to understand what assets you have. This is something that is not surprising to me, which is almost every organization I talk to, that the people who are responsible for network security generally don't have a good idea of what the critical assets are in the business. They just don't, because it's not something that's part of their day-to-day concerns. But when you're looking at segmenting a network, knowing what those assets are and where they're placed, that's the first thing you need to know.
Makes sense. Right. And that's what you're protecting, right? Are those critical assets essentially.
Precisely
Right.
correct. Would you put a biometric reader on a broom closet? Well, no. So that's
Definitely.
part of what can help with network security people is somebody, or for example, a catalyst that has like a broader based view that sees these things all the time, that understands, where your assets placed, how critical those assets. Does that actually align with your infrastructure, right? Are these assets being protected by your firewalls? Do we have an opportunity to make some smart choices with our segmentation strategy to protect those assets?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good information. I feel like, definitely want to give people you know, here's the scary thing we've just told you. Here's how to kind of approach and fix it versus just,
Yeah,
terrifying folks. So I appreciate that. I want to go into a little bit about geo-blocking because
great.
that was something that was also missing when we uncovered in this report. So outbound geo-blocking was missing in 60% of environments. Let's talk
Okay.
about geo-blocking a little bit, why that's important, and how they can approach implementing that if they don't have that currently.
So why is geo-blocking important? The reason why geo-blocking is important is because the majority of cyber criminals that are attacking or targeting U.S. organizations, I'm assuming we're talking about U.S.-based organizations based on our audience here, they're going to be in countries that don't have strong laws, and they don't necessarily have extradition treaties and things like that. So these
Mhm.
people know that they can basically, as long as they're doing what their thing where they are, they can operate with impunity, and there's nothing you can do you can't take away their freedom. You can't send the police to their door. And that's why you're going to see a lot of these attacks coming from outside the United States. Now, I did want to mention, that being said, on service providers, they can get around. Geo-blocking isn't the end all be all. I just wanted to mention in passing that
Okay.
attackers appreciate that as geo-blocking becomes a more common control, they are overcoming that by using cloud service providers, because it's really easy to, like, say, spin up a AWS API gateway, which can then use like thousands of US based IP addresses. So appreciate it's not a silver bullet, but you
Mhm.
can really cut down on the low hanging fruit by just like configuring your firewall to not allow traffic from countries you don't do business in. It's a really
Yep.
easy thing to do. It's not complicated. It's a feature that most newer firewalls have, and you're doing yourself a favor. It's really easy. It's like putting a lock on a door. It's just going to stop someone from being able to just open the door and walk in. So it makes a lot of sense. You get a lot of benefit.
So that's surprising to me then that's surprising to me. I don't know if it's surprising to you, but I'm curious to know that it's missing in 60% of environments. If it's relatively simple and uncomplicated to implement, why do you think why would you speculate that that it's missing? Do you think that people just don't have awareness on, understanding what it is, or what do you suspect?
I think so. If we look across the board, like at all of these numbers, like MFA not implemented, basic segmentation strategy,
Yeah.
there's no segmentation strategy, which
Yeah.
a lot of times, like I said, it ties back to the fact that the network security folks, they just don't have time to think about assets and things like that. So I think it all comes down to the fact that IT operations people are very busy, and they just constantly have a lot on their plate. They're fighting fires all day long. It's not that people lack the understanding that these things are important. It's that when you've just got so much going on, you've only got so much bandwidth, and you're just trying to keep everything running. I think it's just operations people are just overworked, and it's just very difficult for them to think of it more get out of that tactical part and think at a more strategic level about.
Strategically. Yeah. Well, that's where we step in, right? A catalyst and help take off some of that operational day to day and give them the ability to think more strategically. So anybody in that situation, urge you to partner up with somebody like our organization who's helping clients do that. Perfect. Let's see. Let's talk about sandboxing. Now you're going to have to kind of give me some information around what is sandboxing, and then when we talk about advanced threat detection, what are we talking about with those two aspects? Because I'm kind of curious on both of those. A lot of clients seem to also be lacking in those two areas.
Okay, so what sandboxing is a technique where you take suspicious code. Okay, so let's do like a scenario-based thing.
Okay.
So a typical firewall is going to monitor file transfers. So let's just say like I'm Bubba and I work in the shipping receiving department. I'm sitting down on my laptop computer. I'm checking my email. And I see a link from Bob. He works in the shipping receiving at another company. He's like, hey, check out this like cool tool I found to like help me do my job more efficiently. And so he clicks on the link, right? This is, by the way, a classic example of a water cooler attack, where someone in the same business as you seems relatable, offers some helpful link to some information or whatever. Maybe people love little shareware utilities that make their lives easier.
Yeah.
And he goes to click on that link, and this binary, this executable, this bit to run on your computer comes across the internet, and it goes through the firewall. The firewall's like, oh, there's a Windows executable. Let's take a look at this thing. And what it'll do is it'll create what's called a SHA-256 hash, where it just creates a hash that's like a fingerprint that uniquely identifies that binary. And it'll compare it. It'll ask like the bit security vendor's cloud, whoever you're subscribing to, they're going to have some kind of big compute cluster that keeps track of all of this and all this activity that's going on. Like, do you recognize the SHA-256 hash? And you're going to get three possible results. You're going to be like, it's known benign. We know what this is, and it's benign. We know what this is, and this is not okay. Let's block it. Or we don't know what this is. I don't recognize the SHA-256 hash. So let's take that third case where you don't know what that file is. The firewall's got to figure out what to do here. So a lot of times, this is where sandboxing comes in. So if you take this file that's like unknown and you're not sure what to do with it, you can use a like API call to upload it in a sandbox. And the sandbox is like in the case of like what Cisco does, it's just literally like a virtual machine. So we just like spin up like a Windows virtual machine, put the code on the machine, run the code, observe the machine for a period of time, keeping track of everything that's happening in that virtual machine. And then when that code is done executing, you get a report back. And so you can actually run that code to see if anything unusual happens. And then that gives you a report. You can also automatically make a decision based on the outcome of that. Because like, for example, if it runs and then it turns out, wait a second, why is this application installing, why is this creating like a scheduled task to download something from GitHub? Like that would be like immediately that file's convicted. And then what will happen is your security controls will kick in. And if you have like an integrated security stack, or maybe you have like your endpoint security and your firewall talk to that same cloud, your endpoint security can find out like, oh, wait a minute, this SHA-256 that the firewall over there saw has been convicted. I need to delete this file immediately. And so that's like an example of where sandboxing comes in, is we're trying to find out whether something is malicious or not. And if it is, what's it doing and how's it doing?
Got it. Okay. So yeah, it was interesting because we also found that 94% of the IPS deployments had suboptimized policies. So
this is a really good one. Okay, so let's talk about IPS for a second. So this is the most critical thing to understand about an IPS. So intrusion prevention system, they're very advanced and take a lot of horsepower, and they're what makes next generation firewalls. But if the traffic is encrypted, your IPS can't do anything because the IPS needs to do deep inspection. So it's really important to understand that if you want to leverage your IPS, you're going to have to think about your decryption policy and be smart about it. You can't just bulk decrypt everything. There's lots of reasons why that's a bad idea. There's legal reasons. There's just simply logistical reasons of having enough compute to do it. But you want to be able to take traffic that like, for example, I was talking about before, you don't know if it's malicious or not. It's like unknown. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to decrypt that traffic and leverage your IPS to take a deep look into it. I would argue that if you don't have decryption configured, that represents a misconfiguration of your IPS, because your IPS isn't going to do you lick good. Since most traffic is encrypted, so if you're not decrypting, you can't.
So how do they do that? Is that something like a policy or a configuration that you have to set up on the firewall?
Yeah, and there's some infrastructure too. You have to have some certificates and things like that. But that's right. That's going to be something you're going to configure on the firewall. And this is an area where you have a lot of firewalls offer like a powerful opportunity to do, to get do that detection part, to really see if something's going on that shouldn't be going on. And that's something that firewalls are uniquely positioned to do that other security controls.
Yep. Awesome. Great. So let's talk about for a second one non-negotiable, or let's give it like three top non-negotiables for firewall deployment.
Okay. 3 non-negotiables for firewall deployment. So comes back to what we talked about earlier. Step 1, know what you're protecting.
Assets.
Why would you just turn on a firewall and configure it and not know what it is you're trying to protect? You need to have an asset inventory. It's not sexy, but it's so important. Know what you're protecting, right?
Yep. Yep.
Step 2 is keep that thing patched, right? We already talked about the importance of that. You need to be aware. So whatever mailers or whatever you're using to keep track of what's going on in the world, you need to have some mechanism in place to make sure that your firewalls are staying patched and up to date. That is a common problem. I see people are scared to patch their firewalls because they're afraid of outages, but you need to keep your firewalls up to date. That's like, to me, that's a non-negotiable. Have an asset inventory, keep your firewalls patched. And then I guess like the third one would be, well, really those are the biggies. I guess if I was gonna have like a third one, it would be just make sure that your firewalls are sized correctly. Because if you're trying to save money by getting a firewall that's too small, we were just talking about the segmentation part, right? If your firewall doesn't have capacity to allow for adequate segmentation, that's a problem. And generally speaking, firewalls are something that companies don't buy very often. They usually spot them for 5 years or so. So you need to make sure you get you're sizing them correctly to start with.
Yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good call out. Awesome. Anything else that you can think of that we didn't cover today that you would want to point out to anyone listening that like I said, that we haven't covered? I feel like we hit a lot of really good big topics.
So I'm gonna put out a plug for Catalyst. One of the things I really like about Catalyst is the Catalyst engineers are really love what they do, and they're into their jobs. And when I come and talk to Catalyst, the last time I came to your office, literally there were like people that traveled and stayed in hotels and stuff just to come and to talk to us. And they asked great questions. They gave me some homework to follow up on. They were very engaged. They wanted to understand what was going on. And this was literally this last time I came and talked, it was just about the firewalls. And so that level of engagement from a partner is unusual. A lot of partners are just like, they're just SKUs and prices and that kind of thing, more like a transactional type of thing. But Catalyst really, their engineers are really interested, and they really get into it, and they engage with us. They'll tell us where they feel like maybe we could do better, and then they're always hungry to learn more about how they can leverage some of the new technology and some of the innovations that we come out with. I think that's really important. If you're talking to a Catalyst engineer, this is a guy that's going to spend time away from his family. It's just like he can come talk to nerds like me and learn more and get better at the job.
Well, I think we're trying to gain all those additional insights so that we can better support our clients, right? Like that's a huge drive here. So that is a huge difference, and I think something that sets us apart as an organization, aside from others I've seen. Thanks for the call out, and thanks for the kudos there. We do have a really great engineering staff. So I guess to anyone listening in, if you are in that situation, if you fall into the 94% of IPS deployment with sub-optimized policies, lacking MFA, the other we talked about was the misconfigured DMZs or lack of segmentation that you talked about, Steve. If any of you guys are falling into any of those categories, I urge you to reach out to Catalyst. Obviously, we have Steve's support as well from Cisco side. So if we've got Cisco gear, we're definitely going to be doing our due diligence and researching and finding out the best ways to protect your organization and help you move forward in the best way possible. So again, I urge you to do that. And then if you have additional questions about today's topic, if you're curious to learn more from us, just email us at podcast@catalystng.com. And we also will be linking below our cybersecurity report. So our 2025 Catalyst annual cybersecurity report that we talked about today with some of those additional insights. So they'll be linked below in this episode. For now, thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Steve. And until next time, stay secure and stay ahead. Appreciate it.